Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us program today, Raising Unicorns, Creating Affirming Family Community Space for Trans Children. We're celebrating Pride Month with Professor Collen Vesely of George Mason University, as she discusses the experiences of trans children, supporting and offering strategies for adults who work with them. Dr. Vesely is an associate professor and graduate coordinator of the Early Childhood Education Program in the College of Education and Human Development at George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia. Her work examines the experiences of diverse, marginalized, and minoritized young children and their families. And joining her is Xiaolu Zhang. She's a doctoral student, Early Childhood Education Program. And again, they're both here to talk about this very important topic. And I will send it over to you, Dr. Vesely and Xiaolu. Thanks for joining.
Thanks so much, Caroline. We are so excited to be here to be chatting with you all about raising unicorns and really thinking about what are the ways in which we can ensure as communities and families that we're creating really affirming and supportive spaces for trans and gender expansive children and youth.
Thank you, everyone, to be here. I'm excited to have this conversation with you and probably a chance to learn from you too.
Yeah, so a little bit of what we're going to do today. So we'll share a little bit more in terms of introductions, and then we'll give a little background on gender expansiveness if you're not sure what this is and you're kind of a newbie to this topic. And we always love people who are new and looking for more information. And then just some important things to remember and strategies and resources as well. So again, my name's Collen Vesely. Please feel free to call me Colleen. Doctor feels very formal. And I am a professor over at George Mason University, particularly in early childhood education. My academic training is in human development and family science. And on a more personal note, I am the mother of 3 children, and my middle child is gender expansive. And we'll talk in a minute about what does that actually mean. And together, she's now 11, and together we have created a website called Raising Unicorns, and so it includes a blog and resources and just information around our own experiences in hopes to educate but really to also validate other families who may be walking a similar path. So I'll turn it over to Xiaolu to say a little bit more about herself.
Yeah, my name is Xiaolu Zhang. So I'm a doctoral student in George Mason University, specialization in early childhood education. And I have a background in counseling. I used to work as a mental health consultant in a preschool setting before I enrolled to the doctoral program. So I'm on my dissertation stage, and my dissertation is around this area, exploring the social emotional experience of parents who raising transgender and gender expansive children. I will turn it back to you, Dr. Vesely.
Yeah. So we really, whenever we begin these kinds of conversations, we really want to just start with an invitation to really listen with our ears and our eyes and our hearts. This is work of the heart for both of us. And I hope for you too, all of you that are attending. And just notice any moments of discomfort, but we encourage you to stay in the conversation and to stay curious and be open to the experience and to others' experiences as well, as much as we're able to kind of share that in this forum.
Yeah, to me, I think one thing I want to add on is like experience as myself too. It's an experience of unlearning and learning. I grow up in a certain like aligned with a certain belief and the concepts, and working with this population and it's learn a lot. At the same time, I need to unlearn a whole lot, empty my cup in order to refill new knowledge. And that piece is pretty important to me too.
Yeah, I think the unlearning is really important, especially since gender in particular is one of those areas, those schemas that are really rooted so deeply in our minds. And so and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along, and that we're all learning together. And so feel free if there's any, feel free to correct us in the chat, or I'm not sure in this webinar if you can raise your hand or whatever, but we'd love to learn, continue to learn together. So this is an area in which things are constantly changing. I teach other parenting education classes around this, and the person that I work with, we always talk about it being a little bit of the wild, wild west in terms of that the terminology is always is often changing, and we're growing in our knowledge. And so please do know that we're learners too, and feel free to correct or add to what we're sharing. We would be happy to be in that dialogue. So we are hoping that we can find out a little bit about who is in our space today. And so if you're here and you're thinking about a particular child that you know or that you're raising, if you would share with us the age of the child that brought you here today, and then what brought you here. So are you a parent of a trans or gender expansive child? Are you a teacher who has kiddos that are identifying in a variety of ways in terms of gender? Or are you an interested community member? And we were trying to set up polls. I don't know if that ended up working, Caroline, if you were able to launch those or not. But if you don't see a poll pop up, just go ahead and you can pop into the chat. And if you want that to be more private, you can just send it to the hosts and the panelists. And if otherwise, you can also click the drop-down menu to send to everybody. And that just helps us have a sense of how we might tailor this conversation even further. Okay, great. So it sounds like supportive family members, and it sounds like kind of in that young adult space. So feel free to kind of continue to add that in the chat, and we'll take a look at that again to ensure that we are really tailoring this to your needs. Okay. So this goes back to what I was just saying, that we're all sort of learning together, and that really know that we'll never know everything there is to know, and it's okay. And so really staying in that curiosity space and that learning space. So we hope that we all can come with that orientation today. Okay. So words matter. I just shared that there's often new terminology. If you talk to teenagers, they're most, in my opinion, most knowledgeable in many ways around some of the terminology, and most comfortable correcting too. But we have found that PFLAG has a really amazing glossary. It's probably not completely exhaustive, but there's a lot of different terms and definitions in there. And so we'll start with pronouns, and I'm going to see if I can get, we have a video, I'm going to see if I can get that to show up for us. And just to give you some background on this video, my well, at the time she was 9-year-old daughter created the puppet that you will see, and created this short little video to explain, particularly in kid language, what pronouns are, because it is a term that we use in a lot of spaces now. So let me pull this up. Okay. You guys seeing, Xiaolu, are you seeing the video? I just have to hit play.
Yes, I can see.
Okay, great.
Everyone, my name is Tatsuka, and I am a magical water dragon. I also use she, her pronouns. Like many of you watching, I often get misgender. This is when somebody calls me a boy or he, him. This really hurts my feelings. It makes me feel like I don't belong. When this happens, I try to remind myself that we all belong, no matter who we are and what we look like or what pronouns we use. Now you might be wondering, what are pronouns? Pronouns are just simple words that take the place of nouns, so we don't keep saying the same noun over got my driving master KK, I wouldn't want to say like KK was at school, KK played with KK's friends. And that sounds a little weird. So I would say when KK was at school, she played with her friends. Some of the pronouns we use to refer to gender are she, her, him, they, them. But there are even more ways here, for example. That's all I have for today. But I look forward to seeing you again soon for more talks with me, Pesco. And until then, just keep being the very best you that you know how to be.
So that's a little bit about pronouns, and it gives you a little bit of information regarding kind of what's on our website as well too. There's several other videos that that my kiddo has put together, really geared at younger kids, where sometimes this conversation is not necessarily happening or as frequently as we might see among teen and young adults. So we tried to pull kind of the big terms that we often hear. And so gender identity, right, is that innermost idea of ourself as male, female, or both, and really thinking about this continuum rather than thinking about this binary of male, female, but that actually many folks feel sort of fluid in this space. And when we think about gender expression, we're thinking about kind of what are we showing to the outside world, and that could be in terms of behavior, clothing, body characteristics, voice, and this fluidity for many of us we can see across the day in terms of how we might be participating or dressing a certain way that might be more masculine or more feminine or non-binary. Gender expansive is really sort of a broad phrase for thinking about individuals whose ways of understanding and expressing gender fall outside of societal gender norms. It's sort of in our family, that's kind of our preferred term that we use. This has gone through, I think, a lot of iterations, and we can think about how, as a society, we've really tried to move more in this strengths-based space. The term used to be sort of gender deviant, which is a pretty negative kind of spin, and gender diverse, we also hear folks saying, and gender expansive also feels more in this strengths-based space. And Xiaolu and I try to always operate from a strengths-based perspective. Transgender, so a term describing a person's gender identity. This is when how someone feels about themselves, their innermost idea of self maybe does not match their assigned sex at birth. So baby comes out, and based on whether they have a vulva or a penis, they are assigned a certain gender. But what we now understand is that actually sometimes those sex parts aren't in perfect alignment with how folks feel on the inside. And cisgender is another term that we often hear, and this is to refer to an individual whose gender identity, again, that innermost idea of self, aligns with the sex that they were assigned at birth. Okay, I think Xiaolu, you were going to talk us through this.
So we're going to talk about the political landscape. A lot of you are probably already aware how important a supportive environment should be or would be helpful for these children, particularly for younger kids. But however, this political landscape deeply impact the environment of these children. So these information I pull out from the website, I'm going to pop it in the chat. So this is a website they are tracking 43 states of their policy and legislation. You can get more detailed information from this website. Is pretty decent in terms of detailize all the bills and the tallies. So in here, since you can give a guess. It's not you can't see your face or anything, but you can give a guess like how these numbers and this word connected with each other. And then we can show, let's take a couple of seconds and then we can show the result to you. See if that surprised you or not. And here we go. So not national-wise, we have 602 bills. This is the most updated of the 2022 data. And 42 of these bills passed in 2024. And now overall, we have 339 bills active across the nation. Of course, there are 221 failed in some states, but still we have great numbers of bills is anti-trans and anti-this gender expansive and individuals. Can we go to the next slide? So here is more visualized map to show the climate here in the US. Put it in a simple way, those states marked as red is not trans or gender expansive friendly. For those states marked as in a deeper green color, that is transgender and gender expansive friendly states. To take a look at Virginia, our states is in the median overall. So let's look at the chart on the right side. So it's about 11, 12 tally out of 17 those practicing in our states. Can we go to the next slide? So I guess a lot of parents, guardians, people who love our trans and the transgender and gender expansive individuals or care about your safety. So here is the map to show the health and the safety policy and the laws across the nation. So for this particular one, they're focused on the Medicaid policy related to coverage for transgender people, and the states criminalize the exposure to transmission of HIV. So this just shows like pretty much a lot of states didn't address the needs of this population. Virginia is one of them. So here, for sexual orientation policy tally in Virginia, we have less than half tally practice in here. For gender identity policy tally, they have a 14.5, almost a 15. We're on the middle in Virginia, on the middle level of it. So overall, we are not the worst. We have some positive policy, but it's not, at the same time, our new governor issued a policy practice in school, which is anti-trans. I know a lot of people is trying to work defense for themselves, but that is still a work ongoing. So this is Gender Bretman, Dr. Vesely and I love it so much. This is a simple and it's kind of a cute way and kids-friendly way to express the gender expression or how we understand this gender-related, gender identity related concepts. So from the very easy or directly way, the biological sex is how we look like as a from our birth, right? It's like if a girl, if you're a boy, is the genital related. So this is how we define gender throughout from the history until now, and this is how people understand of it. And attraction is related to sexual orientation. Is like who do you want to wake up with? Is who you're gonna fall in love with, a girl or a boy. And then identity is how this person see themselves as who they are. It's not related to biological sex. It's more like how they feel they are or how they identify as who they are. And the expressions overall as a person, how how they dress and express, and how they show themselves as who they are. Dr. Vesely, do you have anything to add on?
No, I think that's good. Well, I want to add too, to assure that we're giving appropriate credit. This comes from Sam Kellerman, who does the genderbread person, but also he has a great little TED talk about gender expression and gender identity, and then a whole bunch of other resources. So we found this to be a helpful resource in kind of trying to parse out how we think about this, and really all of it on a continuum. So the other thing is, Shalu, I think when you put that's why I went to the link. I was trying to copy and paste it. When you put the link in about the bills, you only sent it to to us three. So make sure you send it to everyone. So I was trying to do that, and then ended up going to the website. So I apologize, those of you who are watching, that your screen went a little crazy. Okay. So I'll jump in here, and then Jalu, if you want to jump in after. So when we think about kids' development, so again, we're early childhood folks. And I also think, as I alluded to before, a lot of this conversation often happens when kids are in that large space of identity development, which happens in adolescence, right? And so there's been more conversation, I'd say, about kids who are in that tween, teen, emerging adulthood kind of space. But we want to recognize that actually there's a lot going on with gender in kiddos' minds at a very early age. And so part of what we are always trying to do is increase our conversation and dialogue, especially in these early childhood years. So 18 to 24 months, so toddlers, really see gender, they begin to see gender as a way to group themselves, right? So this idea of grouping all kinds of things, including themselves, in terms of gender. So patterns, right? These early math skills, which is patterning, right? They're seeing patterns in relation to gender. And as early as 18 to 24 months, begin to internalize messages from home and society about how they ought to be regarding their gender. This idea that girls wear dresses, boys play with trucks, those kinds of things get ingrained in kids pretty early on. By ages 2 and 3, they can begin to label themselves as a girl or a boy. But sometimes we'll go back and forth because that hasn't been so totally solidified in terms of their understanding. But what we also know is that kids who are gender expansive, if they have language to use, they can begin to communicate kind of how they might feel. So some kids might say, I'm a girl boy, or I'm a boy girl. They might even make up their own language to describe both how they feel like they're showing themselves to the outside world, but also what is happening in their minds about their sense of self. Ages 3 and 4, we see deeper beliefs and expectations about gender norms. So we can sometimes hear kids in classrooms or neighborhoods, kids playing together, telling each other what they're allowed to do based on gender. And so for gender expansive kiddos or non-binary kiddos, they might feel isolated at this point because we tend to see play being pretty binary even at this early age. By ages 4 to 6, so we're end of preschool into kindergarten, even the beginning of first grade, these gender rules by kids themselves, based on messaging from society, are pretty strictly defined and adhered to. This is what girls do. Girls can play here. Girls, we're going to stick together as girls, or boys are playing there. And again, for kids who are, who are maybe more fluid in their identity, they sometimes can experience this space of not feeling like they belong, not feeling affirmed in who they are. So for those of us who are in the education space, really kind of focusing on creating spaces in which kids of all genders can participate in all kinds of things, and listening for those conversations that kids might be having, or the directives that kids are are giving other children about what they may be allowed to do or not allowed to do based on their gender. And in those conversations, staying curious, asking kids, well, tell me more about that, or challenging even. So, whatever they might be saying, you might challenge it with an instance of something, an example that goes against what they might be saying too. So in terms of data, if we think about early childhood and later outcomes, or we think about youth and later outcomes and experiences that are happening and how these impact later mental health outcomes, here are just a smattering of some statistics. So only 16%, and these are national statistics, of all gender expansive youth always feel safe in the classroom. So if you can think back to the maps that Xiaolu just shared, you can imagine sort of in aggregate across the US with a number of states that are putting forward anti-trans bills, anti-trans policy, that there are a lot of spaces in which gender expansive youth do not feel safe, and quite frankly, are not safe. 57% of all gender expansive youth have been mocked or taunted by their families because of their identities. And in a moment, we'll talk about this real importance of family for kids' mental health outcomes, particularly kids who are trans and gender expansive. 36% of all gender expansive youth have families who show support for them by getting involved in the larger LGBTQ and ally community. The restroom piece, there's been, I think, a lot that we've seen in the media around restrooms, and those of us who have gender expansive kiddos on a more micro level, we experience that on a weekly basis, daily basis. When gender expansive youth can't use the restroom that aligns with their gender identity, 66% avoid using the restroom at school altogether. So those are just a few of those, the experiences of youth that are reflecting some of the policy landscape that Xiaolu just shared about. But what we know from research is that affirming care matters, that what happens in our families, what happens in our communities in terms of feeling supported and affirmed really, really matters. And what does that mean? So that means recognizing and supporting a person's gender identity and expression. That means when a kid says to you, my pronouns are she, her, when maybe for a long time you knew them as he, him, that we'd work our darndest to use those pronouns that that child is saying they are. So from work that Kristen Olson, who's at Princeton, has done, socially transitioned transgender children who are supported in their gender identity have developmentally normative levels of depression and only minimal elevations in anxiety, suggesting that psychopathology is not inevitable within this group, right? That it is less about the gender identity and expression, and it is more about the reaction of those closest to that individual. Research indicates that social transitions or children expressing their gender as they wish in terms of clothing, hair, pronouns, greatly reduces distress, increases self-esteem and self-confidence, improves mood, and enhances peer and caregiver relationships. Again, research demonstrates that gender-affirming care greatly improves the mental health and overall well-being of gender-diverse, transgender, and non-binary children and adolescents. So really thinking about this protective factor of the family and the community for trans and gender expansive children and youth. So how do we do this? How do we affirm young children's gender? In many ways, it's a very short answer. It's good parenting practices that many of us hopefully already engage in, or good teaching practices, or being a good neighbor, a community member, a good mentor. And really that starts with following children's leads. When children tell you or youth tell you who they are, believe them. And ensuring that children know that they belong regardless of how they identify. And then the last thing is really gathering resources to educate yourself. And if you are a parent and you have stress and anxiety and nervousness around this, which is completely normal. If this is a shift in your child's trajectory, that is normal. Don't visit that anxiety and grief on your child, though. This is like when in parenting, we've got to like handle our own stuff so that we can show up for our kids in the most affirming ways possible, because we know that with supportive and affirming parents at home, kids' trajectories in terms of mental health, in terms of specifically trans and gender expansive kids, are much improved. Xiaolu, I don't know if you want to say anything. I've been talking a lot.
Yeah, I guess one thing is like a lot of people know, like transgender and gender expensive children, they have a higher risk to have encounter mental health issues in their further years. However, that is not, a lot of people are just like a stigma around it. It's like they have a problem, they have a psychological problem. Is that's why they be like who they are, kind of thing. And it's not. It's because they were continuously rejected as who they are, and they're trying to express it. They're trying to tell the outside world, this is who I am. But rejection after rejection make them challenged, and they're like challenge and risk their mental health. So that's why we have an affirming experience, affirming, I can't speak today, affirming environment, and like align with how they feel as who they are. That problem will greatly mitigate. So that is one thing people always confuse, or the societal kind of misconcept on this gender and gender expansive individuals. So
Right. It's not the gender expansiveness, the transgenderness that leads to mental health issues. It is the reaction and the structures often in society that ultimately lead to that, because that child feels rejected and as though they don't belong. So a whole smattering of things that we can do, and this is not an exhaustive list, but these are just places to start. And the first piece is really building your own knowledge. Read and learn as much as you can about gender expansiveness, transgender experiences. So read and learn through books. You can listen to other people's experiences if they're willing to share. Again, listen to children. I think this is sort of a general thing that children, whether they're 2 years old, 3 years old, 10 years old, they are whole people who have agency and have senses of themselves. And we need to listen to them and believe them when they say, this is who I am. And I should say, this is who I am today, because it may change over time, and that's okay. Creative expression. So for educators out there, one of the things that you can engage in, and you maybe already engage in a certain way in your classroom, is self-portraits. That gives us a lot of information and a lot of opportunity to kind of hear and listen to kids about who they are telling you they are. But there are other kinds of artwork that you might engage in, even looking at old pictures or current pictures and of the child, and them describing for you, how they see themselves in that picture. Could be another piece as well. Creative expression can be like dramatic play, how kids are dressing up and having opportunities to do that. We know that for kids, that dramatic play and sort of trying on other people's roles is really important overall to kids' development. Picture books are another great way of building this conversation and opening the dialogue with kids and kind of talking through and again, hearing from your own children how they're thinking about themselves. Identifying gender stereotypes. We talked a little bit about that before. Sometimes we hear kids making those stereotypes, but also as adults, we often knowingly or unknowingly sometimes engage in gender stereotypes as well. So try and listen for those, and as we all go along, try to correct those. Shalu, did you want to do this, please? You're still muted.
Yeah, that is, I always do that. So a few more strategies, like to follow children's preference. We mentioned about children know who they are, right? So go with what they prefer, what pronouns they preferred or what a name they preferred. And the parents or the adult around them also play a role to prevent their people misgendering them, to help them to stay strong on their feet, to be confirming about who they are. The second one is family's belief. So family may have holding their own beliefs and they have their own normality and values around concept of gender. As a practitioner, it's more like a community members, and we know family has their beliefs. But at the same time, we wanted to value children's preference, children's needs, to address these needs. Another one is open communication. So talk about this is always helpful, right? It's like children may tell you, I'm a girl today. For gender fluid children, it's like another day, she will say, oh, I'm a girl. So having that open conversation, ask a lot of questions like, oh, well, tell me more about that, as Dr. Vesely just mentioned. Or if the children, the younger children, they haven't had that vocabulary to express themselves, use some materials to help them to do that, right? Use some books. Sometimes some examples I will say is children gonna tell parents, oh, this is who I am. Well, they haven't have the vocabulary to do that. So find different way to open that communication, open that conversation, and that the children talk. And not give them answer, but more like help them, give the vocabulary to them to help them to express themselves.
Can I give an example of that, Shaolu? So, so in our house, we use the phrasing, the old rules of gender and the new rules of gender. And we got that from actually a childhood friend of mine who was doing some work in Minnesota in a library. They were doing read alouds, and they were reading a book related to gender expansiveness. And they talked about these rules of gender. And at the time, I think she was maybe 6-year-old, was watching that read aloud, and she really picked up and hung on to that phrasing. It made a lot of sense to her. In terms of, so going back to number 7 there, families' beliefs, that kids are gonna, I mean, this is just true in general, regardless of gender, is that all families do have different kinds of rules, and navigating that with kids. And so for my kiddo, it was really helpful for her to be able to say, you know, in our family, we live by the new rules of gender, which basically means that there aren't rules around how you look or how you call yourself that are based on gender. There are rules related to adults and children, but in terms of gender, you can be who you want to be. But she also recognizes that that's not the rules in all families, who may be living by the older rules of gender that do kind of bind things more up in a binary. And so anyway, so it's things like that. And that actually has helped too, even with those open lines of communication, giving language at an early age.
Yeah, and communication is always important, not within the family and also with the external world. So the ninth strategy is communicate naming practice. As I mentioned earlier, it's like unlearning and the learning process. For a lot of members in the society, that is a process for them to unlearn and learn. So communicate with others how the children want to be called. Sometimes you probably need to mention quite a few times, particularly for family practicing traditional rules, as Dr. Vesely mentioned, that is an ongoing process. And some family may easy to accept that. So, and also this is probably some children need adults' help on practicing that. You will see like children, the children sometimes go back. I mean, other children sometimes remember, but sometimes they forget. And occasionally children will encounter discomfort feelings about that. Parents can step in and introduce why so-and-so is using certain pronouns. It's an education moment for both adult and children too. So keep that conversation continue. At the same time, sometimes it can be a hard moment for parents, depends on the context of the conversation. And sometimes those moments bring stress to parents. So be aware of that. Again, this conversation, as parents sometimes engage and encounter rejection or denial, and that's come to the 10th strategy. It's like the parents need a community to support them, right? So the parents have stayed on the front line to protect their children, these affirming parents, but sometimes they encounter a very stressful moment or rejections, and parents don't want to lay that emotions to children. So having a community, having with some friends, have the same family structure or situations, and to engage that mental health support or empathy environment, that is it's kind of build a little haven for the parents themselves too. And also, other than the mental support, a lot of practical strategies and practical tips can learn, information can learn from those groups too.
Yeah, as you were talking about the naming practices, it was making me think about my youngest, who's in first grade now. One of his best friends transitioned back and transitioned again, leading up to kindergarten and then the beginning of kindergarten. And it's always interesting to watch because kids get it. Like I simply just said, so-and-so is using he, him pronouns now, and probably had to correct a few times. And at the time, my 5-year-old got it. But as grownups, it's often we get confused, right? Almost because those schemas, those binary schemas have been in our minds so long. But a lot of times kids are, they're very fluid, very capable of making these adjustments and really seeing their peers for who they are and calling them as such. So, and I think too, the other thing I would share about ensuring that you're spending time with families that may reflect the identities of your kids, of your family. One quick story, this is more around sexual orientation. A dear friend of mine, her son who is in college now, recently came out to her as being gay. And the piece of it, though, that made me sad is his feelings of I'm gay and I don't want to be. And some of that might be tracked back to how much experience and exposure he had to other families in which there were 2 gay men, or even through books. And so I think too, just ensuring that our kids are able to see kind of what are the possible trajectories for them in a positive way. So being very intentional about that representation as much as you can. Here are a whole host of picture books. These are more so for younger audiences. Some of our favorites here. So my kids love A House for Everyone by Joe Hurst. And that's a good one too for explaining in language. It's all about kids building something on the playground, but as they describe the characters, they kind of go through around gender identity and gender expression. And this is actually a book that my middle kiddo brought into her first grade class. She's now going into sixth grade, but when she was in first grade and the teacher read it aloud, and it gave her the opportunity to say, I'm just like Ivy, and who's a character in the book. And that helped her friends in that class understand her a bit more, because that year, first grade, there had been a lot of questions about why she wore her hair short and all of those kinds of things. And so, or why she chose the clothes she wanted to wear, why she didn't like to wear dresses. And so this book was an opportunity for her to say, this is who I am. I'm just like this character, and also feel not so alone because she was like Ivy. So another favorite is Annie's plaid shirt. I would say those are probably our two favorites in our family. So here are some resources. So you can use the QR code. It should bring you to a Google Drive that has various organizations. There is also a list of research studies there as well. Books, so both kids' books, but also books to educate those of us in the older audience, adults. Blogs, podcasts, if you're somebody who would prefer to listen to things, there's lots of great podcasts out there too. So that we can all continue to educate ourselves so that we really can create the most affirming and supportive spaces for our young people, however they might identify or express themselves. And I think that is all we have. Xiaolu, I don't know if you had anything additional that you wanted to add.
So I think we covered it all. Do you want to see if the audience have any questions from the audience?
Yeah, I've been looking at the chat. I haven't seen anything in the chat. But we just thank you for being here today, and our email addresses are there. Please feel free to reach out. We're always happy to chat or talk over email, whatever is most comfortable. So thank you again for being here.
Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. Thank you, Professor Vesely, Xiaolu Zhang. Thank you so much for all the information you provided. And this will be posted on our website. I did put in our chat more library programs here, but if you go to our main website, there's a link to our YouTube page. So we should have it up on our site, YouTube page, in a couple of weeks. Yeah, and then, yeah, I don't think I see any questions, but there's a comment here. Thank you all. So thank you both for this program.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.